those who made your translation of chapter 10, do you have your translations? How many have your translations with you? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All 5. So there are 12 people in the, what is this, seminar? 12 people in the gathering. 10 are here, and 5 made the attempt at the translation. No, more than 5 made the attempt. You tried to make it, and you tried to make it, and it was, right, it's difficult.
Well, I didn't have a book, and Ingrid and I were talking about it.
You're trying to make a translation without a book.
Right, I was reading her
I
notes
even
and
wrote it down,
there.
and I felt it was so insulting to loud, so that I tore it out.
That you left it home.
No, I just tore it out. I didn't.
Oh, you even tore it out?
I tore it out.
Oh.
That's wonderful. The English word is panache, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When are we going to start? I don't have a watch. Not even a freckle. As long as the sun doesn't shine, we don't start. It's like that cartoon. Gay and Wilson has the skeleton behind the driver's wheel, and there are cobwebs, and he's having fun. If we took these sheets and I said to you that these writings of yours are a key to your salvation. Now, however it came that you were able to write these, that moment was the culmination of your entire life, even though you did not know it. And now that I have the culmination of your entire life, you are restored to equanimity. You have a clean slate to start over with. You are forgiven all of your sins. You are praised for all your triumph. We will throw these away. This is what happened to Taoism about 500 years after Lao Tzu. About 500 years after Lao Tzu, instead of reading the Tao Te Ching, people stopped being able to read the Tao Te Ching, but remembered apocryphal, legendary stories about Lao Tzu. And instead of reading the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu as a mythic image was extracted from the popular imagination from people who never could read Lao Tzu in the first place. Difficult though it is, they didn't even try. And that mythic image of Lao Tzu was joined with another mythic image, the mythic image of Huang Ti, the Yellow Emperor. And Huang Ti and Lao Tzu were put together, as you can put mythic images together and make a new synthesized image. And this became Huang Lao. And Huang Lao became a god for the common people. A very clever con man named Tao Te Ching came along. He was the sort of individual who wanted to mix up the elixir of immortality. He thought if you mix up this alchemical elixir, you have to understand that in the West, alchemy meant gold. In China, it meant an elixir of immortality. But he ran out of money, and his family complained, we don't have enough to eat, you're spending all the money on drugs, and you're getting nowhere. He couldn't keep on with his court appointment. He had some followers, because they all expected, well, let's cover our bets. If the man has an elixir, we have immortality. If not, we've had some fun. So, Chang Tao Ling, who was the founder of Taoism, the religious aspect of Taoism. Just like L. Ron Hubbard is the founder of Scientology, Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science. Taoism was founded as this kind of a religion. Zhang Daoling remembered that there were some rural districts of China that were less expensive to live in. So he went to Shu area of Sichuan, and he took his followers there, and the poor peasants of Sichuan were very respectful for this court magician who understood things like alchemy and mixing of the elixir and immortality, and he must understand Lao Tzu because he always talked about Huang Lao, and eventually Chang Taolin became the founder of a religion, the effective part of which was for you to write out as a confession everything that was wrong with you, all the problems with you. And then he would take personally these papers, these slips of paper, and because they were mostly illiterate, they weren't very much, and he would throw them into a stream and say, this natural stream now washes away all of your sins. If you do not believe in my salvation for you, you will get back tenfold the guilt and the sins. If you transgress again against my rules, you will suffer punishments. And so he set up an idealist utopian state based upon this kind of confession and fearfulness, and said that this was Taoism. He also, in the Chinese annals, is known as a rice thief, the rice thief, because his payment was minimum 5 bushels of rice per person per year, and then other things as they were needed. Finally, Chang Daoling, I'm going to return them because I'm not a Taoist in that mention at all. Chang Daoling finally got enough money for his elixir and mixed it up. And when he had finished mixing it, towards the end of his life, in his old age, when he had the elixir, he only took half a dose because he didn't want to immediately go to heaven. He wanted to take his time because there were still things he wished to enjoy. Now this is how Taoism is distinct from Tao. 500 years makes all that difference. Most Chinese experience since Chang Daoling, which is about 150 AD, most Chinese experience with the Tao is on that level. In any given generation, there are only a handful of people who could have read the Tao Te Ching, have they even had access to it. Later on, when the Chinese sense of penetrating into deeper mysteries became proliferated, it was because of the impetus of Mahayana Buddhism. A great master of translation named Kumarajiva, who was half Persian and half Chinese, went to China and he made translations of all the great Indian classics in the Mahayana from the Sanskrit, and from that time on, Chinese mysticism always had a Buddhist touch, a Buddhist tone, a Buddhist penetration. So that in the Tang dynasty, by the 600s, 200 years after Kumarajiva, 500 years after Chang Taoling, 1,000 years after Lao Tzu, you had someone like the sixth patriarch of Chan Buddhism, who was a Chinese genius named Huineng. his presentation was always in the Mahayana form. So that Taoism after that, after Huineng, was no longer related to Lao Tzu either, and no longer just a Taoism, but was now a special blending of Taoism and Buddhism, and it became known as, in the centuries, as Chan, a way of meditation. Later on, in the 1200s, 600 years after Huineng, a Japanese genius named Dojin, who studied in China, took the Chan to Japan, and that became Zen. Now, all this time, only a handful of people in any given generation ever could have read Lao Tzu and understood what they were reading, could have understood it. In the 20th century, my Chinese mentor cautioned me about 25 years ago. He said most Chinese who are literate now have either Japanese minds or European minds. They do not read Chinese classics as a Chinese. And even if they could, they do not read it going back through all of the phases of Chinese language. Because if you go back 1,000 years in Chinese history, if you go back to, say, the year 1000, you come not so much to a kind of medieval China, although they call it in American academic studies medieval China, but the Sung dynasty of 1000 BC is already extremely urban civilization, very sophisticated, having thousands of years of literacy before it. You cannot compare 1,000 years ago China to Europe 1,000 years ago. There's no comparison whatsoever. The Sung dynasty 1,000 years ago is comparable to the 19th century in Europe. Very sophisticated, very international, very urbane. And 1,000 years before that, you had the heyday of the Han dynasty, when China already spread from Japan to Persia, from Siberia to South Vietnam already. So that all of this, those millennia come after Lao Tzu. If one could be highly literate in Chinese in the 20th century, you still could not read very adequately the early documents of, say, a Neo-Confucian philosopher like Chu Shi, who lived about 1,000 years ago. It would be very difficult to read. It would be even more difficult to read Huineng, even more difficult to read something in the Han, and almost beyond anybody's capacity to read Lao Tzu. The I Ching is just completely out of the picture. In the West, we have a very remarkable kind of a situation. We go back 3,000 years and we find Homer, who's extraordinarily clear and literate 3,000 years ago. But if you come forward from Homer, it's 500 years before you find anybody at all who can write with that kind of clarity. And so in China, the same kind of situation, or a similar kind of situation, obtains. Lao Tzu is so devastatingly exact that he seems to later generations to be mysterious because of his ambiguity. But he is not mysterious because of his ambiguity. He is mysterious because of his exactness. Because to really understand how something is to be surprised that under such an elegant simplicity, a vast complexity holds. When we come to academics, like this book published by Princeton University Press recently, $65 for 218 pages. Princeton University Press, 1992. And you read this kind of language from someone who supposedly is an expert, has translated a book on Taoism published by the State University of New York Press. She writes in here, Lao Tzu, the old master, is the alleged author of the Tao Te Ching. D-A-O-D-E, one word, Tao Te Ching. Now, first off, there's nothing alleged about Lao Tzu. It's like me saying that it's alleged that you were born. It's up to you to prove that you were born. And you say to me, in all frankness, the fact that I am here, it should be for you sufficient evidence that you were born. The fact that the Tao Te Ching, both words are necessary in equilibrium. And all three really, because Tao refers to the first phase of the energy cycle, Te refers to the second phase of the energy cycle, and the Jing refers to the fourth phase. They're quite distinct. Quite distinct. When the Ma Wang Tui manuscripts were found about 15 years ago, and there were manuscripts of 51 classical Chinese books, some that had never been seen before, 4 new commentaries on the I Ching that had never been seen before, complete manuscripts of books that we had thought that we had, like the Chan Po Tse, we usually had in 11 chapters, and now we have a 27 chapter version. And the 2 manuscripts of the Tao Te Ching go back at least to around 200 BC. But 150 years before that, Chuang-Tzu, who lived as a contemporary of Mencius, and both of them were contemporaries, say, of Aristotle, already is appreciating Lao Tzu. And the appreciation by name of Lao Tzu, 350 BC, is with reverence. Chuang-Tzu being one of the few Chinese who could read Lao Tzu and hear what he was saying and put into living practice what his hearing had developed for him. When these scholars come and say to us in their writings that it's quite probable that the Tao Te, one word, Ching, was a compilation made around 250 BC. It flies in the teeth of obviousness. She writes in here, by the end of the Han Dynasty, the belief in the god Tai Shang Lao Jun, the highest venerable lord, as a cosmic personification of the eternal Tao, had been generally established. A personification. This kind of mentality is already slipped down in a regressive way to the mythological level. And when one slips from the symbolic down to the mythological, it's not the same thing as maturing from the ritual up to the mythological. When you mature from doing to talking about why you do something, you generate meaning. But when you slip from integration down to mythology, it generates doctrines. It generates theologies. It generates a kind of academic pickiness that is an illusion learning. It is in fact a decay of learning. and to be shunned at all costs. And one of the object lessons of Lao Tzu is to beware of false sophistication. Because the false sophistication is this smog layer of decayed integration of people slipping back down into a mythological level and making all kinds of doctrines that have nothing to do with nature, have nothing to do with their selves, have nothing to do with where we go in life and death. She says later on, the author is a woman. Men are not the only ones who are subject to this. She says the most important and basic concept of the Tao Te Ching is the Tao. Now, Tao is not a concept. Concepts, if you want to use that kind of term, occur in the fourth phase. They occur in the mind. This finger has no concepts. If I hold this finger up, I can kind of make a conceptual gesture about it, or hold these fingers up, but it's the mind that is doing the shaping. Tao is not a concept. Tao occurs in a zero base before there is even any doing, before there is anyone to do, before there is anyone to think about what the concept is of who you are, who is doing. It's a gross misunderstanding. It's a flaw on several levels of logic to say that Tao is a concept. She goes on then. The Tao, best described as the organic order underlying and structuring the world, cannot be named or known, only intuited. This is on level of Star Wars Force. The Force will be with you. The Tao has nothing to do with that at all. It's nothing like that at all. That is a kind of a blur of a mythic image put into a dynamic jargon type spin. In meditation, there are ways that you can bring language to that kind of form, and it's very much like a kind of a satellite out of control that's spinning. It's in orbit around the natural base, but different from that, and its glint is simply the reflection from a different light source other than its own, and just shows that it's really spinning, gyrating, and not stable at all. In the Tao Te Ching, and we'll come to your translation in just a moment, she translates here a little section which I want to read to you from chapter 12. But before that, I want to give you just this little bit that she says about the sage. The perfected human being in Taoism can be any individual man or woman from any social stratum. In fact, Taoist literature often presents simple-minded wood-gatherers or fishermen as true sages. In the Tao Te Ching, however, the sage is ideally the ruler. He stands at the apex of human society and mediates between heaven and earth, a sacred shaman king, which is all these touch words for the 1990s. The sage has realized the original Tao. In his mind, he is like heaven and earth. Because of his exposed position in society, he has the power to impart purity and harmony to others. Wherever the sage goes, all around him partakes of cosmic oneness. There are no disasters or misfortunes. Now this is a very pretty picture. It's almost like an embroidered doily which someone would put on some kind of mental furniture. It has nothing to do with spiritual gem. Nothing to do whatsoever. Why are there no crocheted doily pictures on spiritual gem? Because there is no furniture there whatsoever. to put it on. One of the greatest of all Chinese landscape painters lived in the southern Sung. He and his son were enormously talented painters. It would be as if Rembrandt's son Titus had become a very great painter too. The painter's name is Ma Yuan. And Ma Yuan has a brilliant landscape in which he has a Chinese, very large Chinese house, almost like a castle. But when you look closer at this, it is a house where none of the beams touch. No line in all of the composing lines of the house ever meet each other. It is a dwelling place of Tao, of someone who is really a Shen, really a Taoist master, really a sage. Lives in a place that is only focused, but not glued. I'll bring you a slide next week of this landscape and of a detail of this house of Ma Yuan. Ma is famous in Chinese aesthetic history as being called one corner Ma, because he would put all of his drawings, all of his ink, usually in one corner of the composition and leave the rest of it open, vacant. You would have maybe the boughs of an old pine tree and a young boy dynamically present and an old sage looking out into the void. She translates a section of chapter 12 in this way. The 5 colors blind people's eyes. The 5 tones deafen their ears. The 5 flavors spoil their palate. Excitement and hunting madden their minds. Goods hard to get do harm to their legs. She does not listen to her own translation. Let's come to Lao Tzu. Let's put aside this kind of very expensive, very shallow learning. Let's come to chapter 10. Now, I've translated the Chinese title of this in a typical 1940s American phrase, can do. The Chinese Nang Wei. Nang means can. It's the character for can. Wei is often paired mysteriously with Wu. Wu Wei. Not doing, or the void, which is the Buddhist approximation to Shunyata. But I translate Wei very often as the doing of something, and Wu Wei as not busy, in the sense that you're not caught up in what you're doing, but you continue to do it, but not caught up in it. The American usage of the term busy, like in busy day, I've had a busy day. I'm in the world because of a busy day. Well, there is a way in which one can have a very active day, but you have never been busy during the whole day. That sense is what Wu Wei conveys. And it conveys it in the sense that this is, in fact, the mysterious brought right into the presence of life. But in order to prepare oneself for understanding the everyday mysticism of Wu Wei, which is not doing nothing, but it's doing in such a way that you're not caught up in it. In this chapter, the title is Nan Wei, not Wu Wei. So I translate it as can do. Can do. What can one do? One can really do only what you do. If you are alert to your actions, to your activity, if you are surveying the landscape of your own doing, what you really do is very specific, extremely specific. You can even write out a very specific program for images to move on the screen because the actual movements can be specified. One can draw very accurate cartoons and show very close approximate motion, especially at 16 frames per second, because what we actually do is very simple. My friend that I was telling you about earlier in a humorous small theater, Sturgeon, had a little motto. He said, out of the 10,000 things that can happen, only one will. So that in order to really relax and really be exact about your life, do not worry about those other 9,999 things. They cannot happen. Only the one that will, you can keep track of. It's only one at a time that events come to pass. And while there is a huge, enormous complexity in the past, and likewise an enormous complexity in the future, the past and the future and their enormous complexities are like the two wings of a butterfly. They're like the two major attractors, but where they meet is a single pointedness. Now, if one adjusts one's attentiveness, anyone can learn to be attentive to just one thing. And the technique is not to find the one thing like a needle in a haystack, but to let the others go. So that the finding of the one thing is a coming back, a sobering up, a calming down to what is usually translated in the Tibetan, it's called Ivan. Thus. The thusness. The suchness of a moment. If you follow yourself doing exactly and only what can be done, any sequence of those singular focused moments, when they occur in succession, they begin to generate, as it were, a sense of orientation which is universal. It's universal. That you would not have noticed before, but now that you're following the moment as it really occurs, moment by moment, as it really occurs, that succession of moments, all by its own self, generates a completeness of orientation. Now, several thousand years ago, when there were human beings who were very serious, in dire seriousness, desperate seriousness, to understand a kind of a nuclear physics of the psyche was going into, and the record of that is called the Abhidharma. And in the Abhidharma, there are sections in which a moment of thought is analyzed in its structure. And each and every moment of thought has 16 parts, no more, no less. It always has 16 parts. 8 of which can be designated individually, and 8 can never be designated individually. The 8 that cannot be designated individually occur together. The word that I have used for a long time is a word from music. It's a trill. It's never played by note, it's always just a trill. So that the moment of thought has an 8-part analytical structure, and a ninth quality, which is a trill, which matches the whole of the 8 parts together. So in any wisdom tradition, wisdom is always an 8-part structure that makes room for its complement, which cannot be analyzed any further than the fact that it occurs. And if the 8-part exactness is presented, the 8-part trill occurs with it. Universal law. It cannot be otherwise. So that any given moment that matches up in such a way that the 8s come together. But the other 8 occur in such a trustworthy, mysterious confidence that you don't have to worry about them, they will occur. Now in Chinese, mystical, religious understanding in Tao, that 8-part sequence are the trigrams of the I Ching. The 8 trigrams of the I Ching is that 8-fold analytical structure of any given moment of thought, any given moment of existence. No matter how complicated or how broad or how simple, how small, it always will have an 8-fold structure, which, if complete, has already been invited to be joined by an 8-fold trill, which cannot be analyzed. Sometimes it's called in Western mysticism the mysterious ninth. Like in the Hermetic language, the Ogdoad is the 8 and the Aeneid is the 9. 5,000 years ago in Egypt, it was expressed that there is 4 pairs of gods and a 9th god which cannot be specified, Atum, who is unnamed, undesignated quality, occurs also with the 8 when they are together. 3,000-4,000 years ago, it was made into the Heliopolis recension and is the structure at the base of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This quality is so engraved in the language responsiveness of Lao Tzu that he does not need to specify it. He is always talking with that comprehension apparent. So when we come to chapter 10, Can Do, he speaks this way. Sustaining discipline, bodily entity, embraces unity, cannot disintegrate. Concentrate chi, conduces gentle, as can an infant's childness. Washing clean, profound intuition, can be non-faulting, loving people, ruling country, practicing not busyness. Heaven's gate, open, close, Can Do. Family dove, bright whiteness, 4 corners penetrating, can. Unknowable, birthing itself, nourishing itself, birthing yet not owning, doing yet not claiming, raising yet not ruling. This is called profound Te. Now you can see that Lao Tzu's language, when really just delivered, is not ambiguous but is limpidly clear. Because he is so exactly right on that you could not possibly miss it unless you were off the one point of what is happening now. Now, each word, each character in Lao Tzu, each character is a single moment. Out of all the characters he could use, he uses only this one. It's like Shakespeare has a known working vocabulary of 50,000 words. The average businessman in his 40-story, 80-story tower uses maybe 8,000 words in a working vocabulary. But in order to read Shakespeare, you have to read the word that's there. The same in Lao Tzu. You have to read the character that's there. What character is there now? And you let that character occur, appear, and be. And then, if that happens, if you allow for that, if you nourish that, that character exchanges its same focus with the next character. And that next character exchanges places with the next character. And in this way, the clear mind focuses through Spirit Gen exactly on the oneness that's occurring. And if you concentrate, the whole meaning of meditation, the word in Sanskrit, dhyana, means concentrate. It doesn't mean holier than thou, super serious, ascetic concentration. It means ekagrata, one-pointedness. And if you keep that one-pointedness in focus, you can bring into that anvil of attention language which is concentrated to such an extent that each word is exactly everything that needs to be said. So much is this true that in the meditative practice in India, the single word Om was put there like an eternal dot of language. But the academic West that never practices, or those who practice by the daydreams of second-rate teachers, or third-hand, fourth-rate instructors, who never go to the excellence that is really possible for a spirit to be just exactly what it is now. Then language comes into play in such a way that each word is exactly what now completely needs to be said ever. Lao Tzu writes with that kind of dedicated preciseness. Now, if you come to some other translations of chapter 10, what are they going to say? How will they say it? Here is a translation recently done, I think 1990. While you cultivate the soul and embrace unity, can you keep them from separating? Focus your vital breath until it is supremely soft. Can you be like a baby? Cleanse the mirror of mysteries. Can you make it free of blemish? Love the people and enliven the state. Can you do so without cunning? Open and close the gate of heaven. Can you play with the part of the female? That's a little risque. Reach out with clarity in all directions. Can you refrain from action? It gives birth to them and nurtures them. It gives birth to them but does not possess them. It rears them but does not control them. This is called mysterious integrity. Well, this is like fortune cookie language. This will not do. On this level, the Tao Te Ching can be stuffed into a beach bag and taken as kind of pleasant entertainment of getting a little juiced up on advice. That's not what's happening here. Not at all. Not even close to that. Let's try John C.H. Wood, who's extremely capable, loves to write on Zen, and is a Protestant Christian. How does he translate? In keeping the spirit and the vital soul together, are you able to maintain their perfect harmony? In gathering your vital energy to attain suppleness, have you reached the state of a newborn babe? In washing and clearing your inner vision, have you purified it of all dross? In loving your people and governing your state, are you able to dispense with cleverness? In the opening and shutting of heaven's gate, are you able to play the feminine part? Enlightened and seeing far in all directions, can you at the same time remain detached and non-active? Rear your people, feed your people. Rear them without claiming them for your own. Do your work without setting any store by it. Be a leader, not a butcher. This is called hidden virtue. This is called a very poor translation. It's not Lao Tzu at all. Why? Because they do not listen to Lao Tzu by looking at what the character is there before them now, and letting that character give way and give rise to the next character in an unending, concentrated movement of a focus without dimension. Now, the normal mind is very sluggish. You think minds are fast, but the eye is much faster than the normal mind. And the hand is much faster than the eye. This is the whole basis of legerdemain. A good magician can put feigned motions of the hand in between real motions of the hand in such a staccato mix that you cannot see his hand move. You can pull an egg out of your ear and you say, how did I get that egg there? He put it there, but the motion of the staccato motion of his hand, weaving real motion with feigned motions, is quicker than the eye, which is quicker than the mind. Now this whole thing can be turned inside out, where no matter how quick the hands are, the eye exactly sees. And no matter how exact the eye sees, the mind sees pinpoint atomically within the dot. The inner seeing is so quick as to be characterized as spontaneous. The I Ching says, heaven suspends its emblem, and Lao Tzu says, spontaneity is the rule of heaven. Let's take a break with the machines. Several months ago, and I know it doesn't seem to you like it could have been months ago, but we've been doing this for some while now. And you've gained strength of hearing, strength of attention, strength of retention, strength of discernment, of appreciativeness, many other qualities. Several months ago, we talked about a square. We talked about how pairedness is at the very foundation of whatever is manifest. So much is pairedness a foundational quality that pairs occur in pairs. And this is the square, which as a universal form can be discerned whenever the geometry of the expressive pattern is exact enough to be really all-inclusively intelligible. The square can be seen within the pattern. Out of this comes later on, in apocryphal mythological Taoism, the statement that the Shen has square pupils in the eye. That if you meet someone with square pupils, it's a sure sign you're a Taoist master. It's not that the pupils are square, but that the pupils of a Taoist master can see the squareness within the confusion and complexity of the world. One can see structure. We have in our time many talented human beings who sometimes accidentally, sometimes intuitively, sometimes through a wonderful juncture of circumstance, have come upon this kind of structural principle. In his great heyday, when he was beginning to see, Michelangelo Antonioni, the filmmaker, used to carry around with him a 35mm slide that was blank, had no slide. And he used to hold up that squared frame of reference to teach himself to see. And he was so alertly educable to this process, he made a very great film called Blow Up with David Hemmings and Vanessa Redgrave about a photographer who in his rapid-fire exact photographs records exactly the clue that unravels the mystery. But he has to be able to believe that he can see that exactly, to pull it out, to tease out the very image that will unlock the mystery. We're taking 4 of the chapters of the Tao Te Ching each week as this kind of a square. And I've encouraged you that if we wanted to, if we have time, if we had world enough in time, we could generate whole patterns of complexity out of this. It's enough to know that we take 4 each week. And the 4 this week lead up to one of the most inscrutable of all of the sections of the Tao Te Ching, chapter 13. We take 10 and 11, 12, and 13. But we don't take them 10, 11, 12, 13. We take them 10 and 12, 11, and 13. In other words, there's an alternation that happens. Like in yin-yang, there's an alternation. It's like the dialogue of truth. I will say the exact answer to the best of my ability to any question you ask, and you, in your turn, will respond as truthfully as you can to any question I ask. And if we take turns, we will find eventually that we will be talking about the same thing. It may not seem that it could be so, for our first questions will be far apart, and the second and third and fourth questions will be farther apart. But as we got used to being truthful together, the really important questions would begin to come together, and we would finally both ask the same question of each other. Chapter 10 pairs with chapter 12, and chapter 11 pairs with chapter 13, and they make the square for this week. So when we come to chapter 11, it has a kind of a mysterious aura about it. And so I've translated the title as non-use. Not like not usable, but more like the use of the non, the usefulness of the not. Tao being zero base is the most useful of all. In the 18th century, in the court etiquette of European sensibility, the world was divided into the sweet and the useful. And this was the polarity by which minds like the French court used to judge reality. Is it sweet or is it useful? And if it's neither right, we shan't really bother about it. And the great revolution that was the Enlightenment asked the simple question, Montesquieu was the first to ask it, and Voltaire, the most vociferous of all askers, who is it in us that asks such a question? That's far more interesting than whether it is sweet or useful. So when I translate the title, non-use, I don't mean the usefulness of the non. I'm trying to let Lao Tzu speak English through me. He writes this way: 3 times 10 spokes unite in one hub through its non. There, the wheel itself's utilization. Handling clay, thereby done the bowl. Through its none, there, the world itself, world, that is not world as a world, but the world, the clay is world to make the bowl. The world itself's utilization. The space of the bowl is its utilization. The hub of the wheel is its utilization. The wheel will go round only if all the spokes are held together in the hub. But the center of the hub is open. Lao Tzu is speaking a language of saying the none, the Tao, the zero base, has a poignant utilization, a poignant use. But the use is not apparent because the zero base allows for the unity to occur in manifestation, and the unity does the action. The Tao allows for all the spokes to be together, and thus a wheel is there. A wheel is the shape when all the spokes are there, linking the hub to the rim. And so the wheel itself then is the Te. And the activity, the action of the wheel is the working of Te. But Lao Tzu is saying, look deeper than the wheel. Look to what is at the center of the wheel. The center of the hub, the openness, which allows for this. And in a very real, engineer-type way. If the spokes were not capable of being separately articulate, they could not reform together to make the wheel. Because if the spokes were all together, they would still be a plank. It's only by the spokes being separate, being articulate, that they can be reformed back into a wheel. The Tao, by being a zero base, allows for the articulation of things and the effective reforming of things into a new shape. The plank becomes the spokes, and the spokes reform to become the wheel. Yes, there is usefulness in the wood. That it was a plank, that it is spokes, and now that it is a wheel. But the non's use is poignant, for it has invisibly, behind all of the scenes, allowed for the articulation to occur, for the reforming to occur, and for the wheel to have its, an English word was made by Buckminster Fuller, he called it tensegrity. Tensegrity is the structural integrity of a working system. When a wheel is spinning, we don't say that it's integrated. We would say that, using Fuller's word, it has tensegrity. He's saying, just like the wheel is made and actually articulated and reformed and operative secretly because of the knot at the hub, so too the bowl with its space is where the usefulness is. And then he gives us the third example. He says cutting out doors, windows, thereby done the room. Through its non-there, the room itself's utilization. We can come and go from it. We can look out or look into it. It is now a room. So with these three as examples which have been aligned, the wheel, the bowl, the room, then Lao Tzu says, therefore, the there itself, thereby done. The beneficial, none itself, thereby done utilization. So he has this beautiful cadence of showing us this example of the wheel and the space of the hump, the example of the bowl and the space within it, the example of the room and the spatiality that is made by what is cut out of it. And concludes, therefore, the there itself is thereby done. The beneficial, none itself, thereby done utilization. It's a quality of language that is, the English word is abstruse. It's abstruse, it's transcendent, it rises above normal usage, and it's distant. Abstruse means it's transcendent and distant. Why is it transcendent and distant? Why is it abstruse? Why do we need this kind of language? Why would he write this way? Because he's inviting us to come out of the mundane, come out of there. It's like the old Hermetic emblem in the late 1st century AD was always the helping hand extended by someone to pull someone else out of the pit of ignorance. Come out of there. You belong in a larger world. So one has to come out from the very word existence, existence, coming out from, standing out from, and then put into motion so that one can go very far. So one needs an abstruse language to bring our sense of intelligence out of the mundane and free it far away from the normal sense of what we could consider something that we could understand. Why he does this is because chapter 13 is going to be one of the most abstruse of all the chapters of the Tao Te Ching. He's setting us up. He's preparing us. He's saying, stretch yourself above and beyond. And we'll be back one chapter after the next, and we'll use that stretched capacity to understand something that is almost at the edge of incomprehensibility, nevertheless can be understood. So in between 11 and 13 comes chapter 12, and chapter 12 pairs with chapter 10. Chapter 10 is can do, chapter 12 is abstain, desiring. Now this is not on a mundane level of being a killjoy. Don't have any list of wants. It's not that level at all. He's saying, watch what you reach for when you go to grasp. What do you use to grasp? You can use your hands, and there's actually a very finite number of things that you can grasp with your hands. My hands are full right now, just 2 things. You can grasp with your imagination, much broader spread and very difficult then to satisfy. He's saying here in chapter 12, abstain from this activity. Abstain from desiring. What happens when you abstain from reaching with hands, with imagination, with many other apprehensive qualities or prehensile abilities, you get the pair to can-do. What was can-do all about? About birthing itself, nourishing itself, birthing yet not owning, doing yet not claiming. Here is the paired complement to that. Chapter 12. This is the chapter that was translated by the erstwhile scholar. The 5 colors make Jen's eye blind. The 5 notes make Jen's ear deaf. The 5 tastes make Jen's mouth bland. Horse race overriding ground. This hunt makes Jen's heart turn tough. Difficult realizing itself's treasure make Jen's conduct stocked up. Therefore, Spirit Jen does the inner, not does the eyes. Therefore, dismissing the latter takes the former. Now chapter 13, which is, I translated using a key from D.T. Suzuki. I think that he's right in his translation of this chapter. This is from the 1896, the translation almost 100 years ago. Loathing shame. Loathing shame. Now some of you are familiar, perhaps, with the sociological idea that shame is always paired with guilt. And there are whole typologies of sociological cultures, a shame-guilt culture. Don't you feel guilty? And when you feel guilty, are you not then ashamed? It's this kind of meting out the worst punishment possible, self-punishment. You're guilty of the crime, therefore you should punish yourself by this feeling of shame. Chapter 13, 2,500 years ago, is the Chinese archetypal way of saying, do not do this. Do not do this to yourself. Do not do this to others. Loathing, shame. Favor, disgrace. 2 characters. One meaning favor, the other meaning disgrace. A 3rd character, which translates as like, and the 4th character I translate fear. We've all experienced fear. What happens in fear? Someone throws a rattlesnake on the table and recoil. In fear, the first thing that you experience is the shock of it. And then the second quality about fear is it takes a long time to go away. It suddenly is there and it trails off, and sometimes the trail is internal. Lao Tzu says, favor, disgrace, like fear, esteem, great anxiety, like bodies. What meaning? Favor, disgrace, like fear. Favor does to the lowly, realizing itself like fear, losing itself like fear. This means favor, disgrace, like fear. Favor comes all of a sudden, and disgrace lingers on eternally. Disgrace is that shame quality. Favor has the shock of guilt. In life, we don't expect favor. We come, as we become more mature, we become rather circumspect about who is talking this way to us, who is favoring us, what do they want, what are they after. Because we realize that in a nourishing relationality, favor is like a sore thumb. Why would you bring that up here? Why would we need to isolate something and parade it when we have a whole pattern of relationality which has millions of nourishing points? So favor, disgrace, together are like fear. Just so, esteem and great anxiety, not just anxiety, but great anxiety, are like bodies. What meaning esteem great anxiety like bodies? Now this is very difficult. He says, I think thereby have great anxiety. Now this phrase is extremely difficult until one begins to realize the very first noble truth of the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism is that suffering is real. The word in Pali, one of the original languages, is dukkha. The first noble truth is that the reason that you are suffering is because that suffering is real. You're not making it up. It's not an illusion. And the second noble truth that goes with that, that pairs with that, just as the suffering is real, the relief from that suffering will also be just as real. It's not like a good news yet, but it is like the realization, as your suffering is real, the relief from it will be equally real. And then later on, the great fourth noble truth is that there is a way that you can find out about to effect this relief. You can learn how to do this. We're made in such a way that we're made to know how to do this. That's why our species name is Homo sapiens sapiens. We repeat sapiens twice in the anatomical, scientific designation of us as creatures. Sapiens, sapientiae means wisdom. We are wisdom men. Why? Because we are not only made to know, we're made to know how we know and that we know. That's our very nature and structure. We do that better than anything else. This is one of the sources of grandeur of the whole movement throughout history of giving freedom to every single human being. Do not be fooled by sociological statuses, by historical circumstances. Every single Homo sapiens sapien is capable of enlightenment. It's like the very first thing that a real world teacher learns, proves to himself or herself over and over again that even I am capable of enlightenment. Because you go through a period where you can't believe it. Anyone else but not me. Because I know what I have done. I know what I'm capable of doing. I know what I do. Therefore, I opt myself out. I know that I am not capable. And it's later finding that even you, with all of that list, a telephone book full of faults, as Shelley says, deeper than death or night, still in all. Still in all. You can be brought back. So he says here, what meaning esteem great anxiety like bodies. I think, thereby, have great anxiety. That doing, I have a body. When you experience anxiety, it comes home to you that you're here. The body registers the anxiety like a finely calibrated machine. Even finer, a finely calibrated organic sensitivity. You know that you are suffering, not some indifferent you. This. It's hyperventilating, it's nauseating, it's in vertigo, it's cramped, the litany. All of us could give a Hamlet speech that would curl our own toes. The body records it. The body records. What does the body record? It records great anxiety. And surprisingly, it is the body, not the mind nor the person, that records esteem also. You think I'm great. Oh, I am important. It's the body is the recorder of esteem also. Just like favor and disgrace turn out to be a pair, esteem and great anxiety turn out to be a pair. And that one needs to be very, very circumspect about esteem and great anxiety at the very same time. How else can there be balance? The Bhagavad Gita says that evenness of mind is yoga. We can't be shunning anxiety and craving esteem. That just makes the wheel of ignorance go around. Like you can't be courting favor and keeping away from disgrace. That's a tiger that chases its own tail and turns into butter. Here's what Lao Tzu says, very, very subtle. What meaning, esteem, great anxiety, like bodies? I think, thereby, have great anxiety. That doing, I have a body. When I have no body, I have what? Anxiety. Notice an I, with or without a body, still anxiety. I have an anxiety that I have a body, and then on the other hand, I have an anxiety that I don't have a body. Do you see how the body is like at the zero of a calibration that runs way off the scale on the positive and comes back and runs way off the scale on the negative? It goes either way. It's like a pendulum. The only way to have it rest at zero is to be present in the body now, in equanimity. And when you are, esteem and anxiety are equally uninteresting. Uninteresting. They literally have no taste. They not only are not to be responded to because you try to look away from their appeal, they don't have any taste at all. They have no appeal whatsoever. Favor and disgrace, the same thing. So he says then, I think thereby have great anxiety, that doing I have a body. When I have no body, I have what? Anxiety. Therefore, esteem. On the other side, from great anxiety, esteem. Therefore, esteem. Thereby, body busy with heaven earth. One then able thereby to be trusting heaven earth. In other words, when you're not caught up with esteem and not caught up with great anxiety, if you're busy with the wholeness of heaven earth, that they be whole, that they are whole, that you are living in their wholeness. If the body is busy with heaven, earth, one then able thereby to be trusting heaven, earth. If you're busy being a part of the whole, you can trust that whole. And then he concludes, character, which I translate as loving. It's rare in Lao Tzu that you have this kind of a statement. He is usually so pure that we think to ourselves that something like loving would be sentimental, or would be sophomoric, or superficial. But real loving is real, and not sophomoric, not superficial. It's like in the Phaedrus, the dialogue of Plato, where Socrates, in a conversation with Phaedrus, comes to characterize love as a god in a certain way, and then after he's done all this, Socrates' inner spirit catches him up and stops him. He says, Phaedrus, I have sinned against my spirit, for I have talked about love as if it were this kind of thing. But love is a pure spirit, and I must now speak rightly about love immediately in order to come clean about it. Because the actuality of the reality of love is that it is pureness itself. And so Lao Tzu says, loving thereby, body busy with heaven, earth, one then able thereby to be entrusted with heaven, earth. When you're intent on it, in the intentness with wholeness, you can trust the wholeness. But when the concomitant nourishes in you a love for what you're doing, then you can be entrusted with heaven. This is a very, very abstruse language, but comes to deliver to us most important realization. Now, how does the competition translate this? Let's come to, let's see what happens here. This 1990 translation. Being favored is so disgraceful that it startles. Being honored is an affliction as great as one's body. What is the meaning of being favored is so disgraceful that it startles? Favor is debasing. To find it is startling. To lose it is startling. This is the meaning of being favored is so disgraceful that it startles. What is the meaning of being honored is an affliction as great as one's body. The reason I suffer great afflictions is because I have a body. If I had no body, what affliction could I suffer? Therefore, when a man puts more emphasis on caring for his body than on caring for all under heaven, then all under heaven can be entrusted to him. What? Well, but that's just the opposite. When a man is sparing of his body and caring for all under heaven, then all under heaven can be delivered to him. Don't marry me like this. Why would it be the direct opposite? Because it's someone who is hypnotized by the mirror of language. There is such a psychic quality as the upside down seer. Somebody who tries to see within the same way that they see without says that there's an inner world. And just as you see in the outer world, they imagine that you see in a mirror-like way in the inner world. they do not understand transformation. The only way to really interiorize is through transformation. The inner eye does not see things, does not see objects. So when you see images in your mind, it's a carryover of the perceptual seeing of worldly eyes. So when so-called spiritual teachers or psychic masters teach you to visualize, they're weaving you into a mythological level that holds you back. Because the real spiritual teachers will say, wipe the images. The 13th Ode of Solomon, written about 90 AD, says that when you come to the mirror, wipe the cosmetics off your face. Mm-hmm. And when you look to see the image, be aware of who is looking to see. And when you bring this vision to Jesus, then you will see that he is seeing who you are. It's a very intricate way of showing how to let the mirror quality of the psyche subside. The cosmetic images of this world subside. And what is left is temporarily a nothing, but in that nothing, a real loving occurs. Let's try one more translation, and you can see for yourself that it's not just Western academics. Welcome disgrace as a pleasant surprise. Prize calamities as your own body. Why should we welcome disgrace as a pleasant surprise? Because a lowly state is a boon. Getting it is a pleasant surprise, and so is losing it. That is why we should welcome disgrace as a pleasant surprise. Why should we prize calamities as our own body? Because our body is the very source of our calamities. If we have no body, what calamities can we have? Hence, only he who is willing to give his body for the sake of the world is fit to be entrusted with the world. Only he who can do it with love is worthy of being the steward of the world. It's very Christian, very Protestant, and it's extraneous to Lao Tzu. And it is not what Lao Tzu says at all. Not at all. Let's try one more time, chapter 13, and we'll let it go for tonight. Favor, disgrace, like fear. Esteem, great anxiety, like bodies. What mean favor, disgrace, like fear? Favor does to the lowly, realizing itself like fear, losing itself like fear. This means favor, disgrace, like fear. What meaning? Esteem, great anxiety, like bodies. I think, thereby have great anxiety. That doing, I have a body. When I have no body, I have what? Anxiety. Therefore, esteem. Thereby, body busy with heaven, earth. One then able thereby to be trusting heaven, earth. Loving thereby, body busy with heaven, earth. One then able thereby to be entrusted with heaven, earth. Let's try something for next week. We're going to make the copies, have them typed, have them xeroxed of your attempts for chapter 10. Let's try with chapter 14, the same thing. Try to get more translations of the Tao Te Ching. Try to make some comparisons. Try putting it in your own words, and then try this. We'll go one step further than we did this past week. When you finish your translation, make it before Wednesday night. Take your translation Wednesday night and just put it under your pillow and sleep on it. Now what happens in this is that our spirit never sleeps. When we do something intently as a person, the complete reverberation, the complete consonance of that records, in a way, evokes a response more correctly, so that our spirit is alerted to a certain direction. In mathematics, we would call it a vector of our intent. It's like the very truth of fairy tales. If you believe them, they're true. If you create this kind of a direction, this vector of intent, and you pair it with another direction of intent. The first direction of intent is to make a translation of chapter 14 of the Tao Te Ching. The second paired vector is to put it under your pillow and sleep on it, and let your spirit, or some people will say they're unconscious, work on it, respond to it. Then in the morning, Thursday morning, then read it for feeling tone. And you will be able to make whatever corrections, whatever emendations, whatever difference you will. Why is this so? It's as universal as a mathematical form. When you have two vectors from a common point, they generate in between them a tensor which resolves their disparateness into a single, identifiable, expressible reality. It's a whole branch of mathematics that one could master